Welcome. It is noon on Wednesday, and this must be Writing Wednesday, where I'm Janet Fitch. I'm your host and mentor, I suppose, and at least hopefully helpful figure in your writing life. Um, I Every week I come here at noon Wednesday and answer your writing questions. So I answer craft questions, psychological questions. Hi, Amy. Existential questions, um, business questions. Hi, Gail. Uh, Gail, we're doing your question today. So I'm glad you're here. Um, and If you have questions for me during the week, send them to me at my website, janetfitchwrites.com. And while we're live, feel free to put them in the comments section and I can answer them as we go. And this is more of a conversation with you as much as it is a fireside chat. But both are true. It is spring and at least here in Los Angeles, it's spring. We had a brief bout of 100-degree weather, like suddenly, 2 days of it, and then back to a nice, cool spring time. And for those who don't know me, I am very interested in the weather. I think that we really, your work comes alive when you put your character into a season, a time of day, into their bodies. And the awareness of seasonal change, the awareness of uh, living in the physical world. People are getting very, very detached from the physical world. I myself spend most of my time right here, writing away, and there was something I was doing this week and last week, and it said, "Do you know what phase of the moon it is?" I mean, some of you might know. But I had to go outside and go, wow, it's been weeks since I've looked at the moon. Let's go outside. And by God, it was a waxing gibbous. So who cares about that? But it's something that primitive people knew damn well what the face of the moon was. They always knew because they were much more connected to nature and they had all their rituals and holidays and um, myths and legends about the sky, which we've lost touch with unless people are into working magic and things like that. And then they're more in tune. But we, in general, as writers, what are we being paid for if not to be in tune with the human condition, including physical reality? Um, as we become screen workers, the, the area of focus, it just keeps becoming narrower and narrower. And frankly, I don't care about too much about screen world. I guess I'm going to have to expand my uh, exposure because this is what the world we're living in right now. But we want at least to know. I mean, everybody should know what the face of the moon is. So what a waxing means, it's going towards full, and waning means it's going away from full. That's all. Okay, waning and waxing, easy. Um, and then gibbous, when the moon is uh, waxing, there's the crescent moon, and then it gets into the half moon, and then it starts sort of bulging, and that's your gibbous moon. And you can tell if it's waning or waxing. I learned from some, who knows where, some source, that when it's a backward C, it's gaining. it's waxing. And when it's a frontward C, it is getting smaller, it's waning. So waxing gibbous means it's going towards full, and the backward C. So uh, we had our big full moon. Was a smaller moon. It was had been called the flower moon by the Native Americans, um, because May, it's springtime, um, and all the flowers are out, and and for astrological people, they care very much, like what's what sign it is, and um, the full moon, it has certain powers. I don't know if people are into that. The old farmer's almanac. If you want to have characters who are in touch with an more rural way of living, um, the legends and rituals of the moon are very interesting in American folklore. Our farmer's almanac that used to come out every year, and farmers would look at it and get predictions on the weather. And I don't know how accurate they were, but certainly they went by it. And somebody must have been keeping records and noticing whether how accurate these farmers' almanacs were. But you traditionally you plant in the waxing moon, right? Because things are growing. It's a good time to grow things. And then in the waning moon, you do things that require sort of trimming. So you do your weeding. Weeds pulled under the waning moon are less likely to come back. You cut your hair in the waning moon, you cut your nails in the waning moon. It's a good time to clean because it's less likely to get dirty, theoretically. Good time to clean out things, if you've got to break up with someone, do it in the waning moon if you have, if you want it to be over with. So that kind of thing, waning moon, waxing moon, you do things that you want to flourish. And then the full the full moon is a great time for sociability. If you're gonna have a party, do it on the full moon. See people around the full moon. It's a celebration, it's a culmination, it's wide open. And there's a certain vibe to it. Anybody who's been in or had loved ones in uh, hospitalized for mental illness, and it is more difficult time for people working with the mentally ill, and a harder time for the mentally ill. If you are sensitive to the moon, or you have a character who's sensitive to the moon, and you want to work with that kind of metaphor, full moon energy. But it's a good time to throw a party. It's a good time to see your friends and, get some socializing done. And then as you move towards this is what, the traditional view was, as you get closer to the new moon, the dark moon, that's a time to kind of pull in, gather yourself, think about things, prepare intentions for the coming month, and then the new moon comes through, and it's just a little sliver. So I've been thinking about the moon because it's like, what is what is it? Oh, it's a full moon in Scorpio. Wow, you know, for whatever that's worth. If you have a character who is into that kind of thing, use it. But at least as writers, we should know what phase of the moon it is, because um, it's being in contact with physical reality. What is blooming right now? What is, I see the little green flowers on our persimmon are here, hiding in the leaves. I notice that there's already fairly good sized fruit on the figs, but they are not red yet. They're still green. Uh, we've gotten our bloom off of the orange tree. Um, and all the scents that are involved, the orange the blossom bloom. It's really gets very intense, and it's over now. The fruit has been set, and they're starting to have the hard little things, and the fruit drop. Um, Lots of metaphors come with nature. So the more you can observe, in general, the more you can observe. It trains the mind, it trains the eye. Um, so let's see. So we're going to be talking today about. Uh, oh, Gail says my grandfather, who was a farmer, swore by it, the Farmer's Almanac. So if you want to ever portray rural rural people, there's going to be somebody who is going to be planting by the moon, uh, by the Farmer's Almanac. Um, it's a really great tie to the past. Um, and GB Walter, I know your name, but GB is going to have to be it, because I always have trouble with people who have their non-name um, handles. A previous girlfriend who was a nurse said the most actual traumatic emergency room events happen during the full moon. Yeah, because it's a really expansive energy, and the emergency rooms are in bad shape, and the mental hospitals are in bad shape, and they just demand. There's a lot of loose energy going along, so it's great for a party, but drive carefully after it. Okay, so. Uh, so Gail's question is getting to a place of high emotion. I'm working on the climax. Oh, of course, my neighbor is deciding to do some sawing. I'm going to close this door. We love our neighbors, but they always do things at the wrong time. So Gail says, I'm working on the climax of my book, and I'm having trouble getting my main character's big emotional turmoil on the page. Any tips? Thanks, Gail. Okay. Well, this is, first of all, handling emotion, big emotion, or any emotion, um, is first, it's really a good thing to have your have your Rosetta Stone. And I know that we've talked about the Rosetta Stone before, but I'm going to reiterate how it works. What the Rosetta Stone was the same statements. I don't remember if it was, probably, where our land ends and somebody else's lands begin. I don't remember the actual content of the Rosetta Stone. But they noted that there were 4 different alphabets, 4 different languages um, inscribed um, in this stone found in the Near East, um, and each. Yeah, GB, we will get to your question in the process of doing Gail's question, because that's the other side of it. So the Rosetta Stone is it had 4 different alphabets. And because somebody could read, say, the Greek, then they could look up and see the hieroglyphs, they could see the cuneiform, they could see the 4 different languages on the Rosetta Stone, and were able to break the code. They were able to translate from the other languages. It goes back and forth. So if you have the Hittite or whatever, you can read the Greek, or you can start being able to read the other languages. So it's a key. And if you think of emotion, I keep a book called that I call the Rosetta Stone, and it's for emotion, and it's emotion in the body. So what it is when you are in the grips of an emotion is a good time to get the Rosetta Stone out. And you put down what maybe the emotion is, like waiting, uncertainty, dread, whatever that emotion is. And then you find it in the body. Where do I experience the dread? Do I get it here? I call this sort of the gills. You feel tightness here, or do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your arms? And how, and then follow it, because what you'll find is once you start uh, pinpointing where in the body the emotion is happening, um, and what it feels like, um, it starts to move. So you follow it until it leaves the body. Um, so that when you go to describe, say, dread, use a bit of what you've discovered. Like, my example is shock. The shock, the unpleasant surprise, disappointment. One of the things I noticed, it's a long list as I'm following it through the body, but one of the things I noticed was my arms feel really weak when I experience that. So that when I when I was writing Paint It Black, my second book, I had my character on the phone getting really bad news. It's not a spoiler, it's right in the beginning. Um, Getting bad news on the phone that her boyfriend has committed suicide. That her arms got really weak and she could barely hold the phone. So you can use your research. If you're dealing with an emotion, you can go to your Rosetta Stone, look for the emotion that you want to portray, and then look down the list of the physical, where that emotion manifests in the body. So really, like an encyclopedia, this is something that you will use over and over and over again, but you have to develop your own. So something that I recommend is looking through, I used the Family of Man, Edward Steichen show after World War II that circulated all over the world. It was sponsored by the UN. And it had people in various cultures, um, their major events in life. So holiday, like birth, uh, children, courtship, marriage, um, grief, joy, amusement, joy, um, categorized so that they're all together. So you would look at say, a photograph of people. There's one wonderful photograph of people in a movie theater clearly in the American Midwest in the 30s, 40s, um, at the movies laughing. And it gives such a feeling of that homey joy, in a movie theater in some small town in the Midwest, um, and everybody enjoying themselves, and it's like, where is that in the body? And I find, among other things, um, that I get a very heavy feeling in my ass. That it's a comfortable feeling, and how would I ever have made that up? Never, you know. Um, so I can go into if a character is experiencing extreme joy, we we normally don't stop to think, where do I feel that? And having a big fat grin on your face is, have we seen that before? Is that going to stir anything in the reader? that they haven't seen before? And probably not. Whereas if you actually study the movement of various emotions, what does jealousy feel like? What does humiliation feel? Where do you get the feeling in the body? And follow it, because it's not just one feeling. It'll move if you're watching it. Um, Notice how the different gestures and how the body tries to release those feelings. So if somebody gets a very tight hip joint, they might cross their legs in a certain way to try to alleviate that feeling, or the back or the stomach. How What kind of gesture would somebody resort to? And then you give that to the character. So how do you um, so the first thing you do is think about what is how the character would physically respond, or how do they, you don't want a sinking feeling in the stomach. We've heard that a million times. You have to find your own version of that. So, what is a sinking feeling in the stomach? Can you find a, a, a novel way to describe that? You know, it's the big drop at Magic Mountain. It's the, coming off, or coming up to the plunge on the Mighty Mouse roller coaster, or the elevator that's cut, its cable has snapped, or what kind of sinking feeling, the kayak filling with water, the canoe, the rowboat you thought was in good shape and it's filling rapidly with water, or a car that's gone into the lake and filling with water. So you want to know what the feeling is, and then find language to couch that feeling uh, in an interesting way for the reader. So there's a tool for you. Um, I'm working on so this is a climax of the book, and having trouble with the character's big emotional turmoil on the page. So thinking about where in the body the feeling is, and then what's how does it manifest itself? Is it you feeling upper chest, you can't breathe, you know, and what is that? And then you have to give language to that. So if you feel like you can't breathe, you can say, oh, she felt like she couldn't breathe. And, I mean, certainly nobody's hair is going to blow back at that comment. So you think, what causes people not to be able to breathe? What if, does it feel like a band tightening? And then what kind of band tightens like that? What kind of, what kind of band, if you feel like you're choking, what chokes people? And see if you can come up with a metaphor for that feeling. It's going to be really important. If you're not used to creating metaphor, that's a problem. So an exercise to increase your ability to produce metaphor is to take common cliche. Big as a house, small as a mouse, white as milk, cold as hot as hell, hot as whatever. So hot as, cold as, small as, big as. Make a list of usually pairs help you think of them. Think of maybe 6 to 8 pairs. Hot as, cold as, soft as, hard as, etc. And write down first the cliche, hard as a rock, and then start trying to find more interesting hards. how hard was it? You know, you know, it was a sudden calculus exam. Hard as a sudden calculus exam. Hard as what kind of things can be hard? Make a list and then start writing metaphors. Metaphors like, um, that what they do is they'll give you the sensation because we know how hard, maybe it's not hard as a teacher's, hard as that, first F, hard as an A student's first F. That's hard. And maybe we're not an A student, and maybe we never got an F, but we in a body, and we can feel that. We can feel how hard that might be. We're humans. This is why, you know, fiction is an empathy machine. If you cannot bring across to one human being what something feels like to another human being, uh, that there are ways to do it, but if you can't make that jump, um, that's a tough profession for you. And this is where you think about soft as, and then you think about what how soft can soft be, you know, um, and bring that in. So then we're talking about shaping. Okay, let's look at some of these comments. Um, uh, so I will be get to GB's comment. Um, can you remind us of the title of the book you love about facial expressions and gestures? It's called Man Watching by Desmond Morris. Um, it's a really good book. But the other way to do it is to watch movies, look at photographs, and then challenge yourself to describe what you're seeing. Um, Man watching. Uh, no, that's and then not facial expressions, but facial characteristics. Uh, that was The Art of Face Reading. It's a Chinese face reading book. The Art of Face Reading, I think it's called. Um, Hi, Zunaid. Um, Blair says, I default to images usually to describe psychological states, but that often feels too detached from sensation and the body if it doesn't start in the body. That's right. That's if you're in a writing group, if you're in a good group, or you're in a workshop, um, that will be the comment you will get over and over and over and over again is I'm not feeling that I'm in the body. I'm not feeling him in his body. Um, that people want not just it's not a labeling of emotion, because a labeling of emotion doesn't make the reader feel anything. He was sad. Well, he's sad. Is he? I don't know. But if I can feel him drop the phone because his arms suddenly got weak, or I can feel um, the weight of not even getting, of that tussle to even get out of bed if you're sad. It's like, I don't have it. You knock something over and you just leave it there. That's a physical feeling that the reader then can be in the body of the character and experience the emotion. Um, if they're not in the emotion, if they're not in the body, they're not going to feel the emotion. So, um, if you're having trouble getting into the character's big emotional turmoil, turmoil is not a steady thing. Turmoil is like this, right? So it's going to have rise and fall, rise and fall, rise, and then something else comes up. So it's going to be have a lot of activity, interior activity. Turmoil is activity. And so things are going to hit and then hit again and hit from another direction. And so as you describe emotion and as you describe gesture, think of dimensionality of how that moves through. Um, say the big climax. I discover that my let's take a classic. I discover that my mother, my daughter, my sister, my daughter, my sister, you know, um, somebody realizes something like that. And then what does a realization feel like? You go into your Rosetta Stone and you go, it's a needle like feeling. So you get the needles. But once you've got the needles, then you do have to do something else to show the continuation of that turmoil. You have to be very much not only in the body, but in the character's mind. The more um, emotional a scene is, the more, as you know, when you're in a very emotional scene, you're not as much in contact with the exterior world. Things kind of stop in a way because there's this turmoil inside. So I could barely hear what he was saying. I just saw his face and his mouth and his teeth, you know, and his eyes bulging out. You're gonna what you have to ask yourself, what does one see in an emotionally intense moment? Do you you know I mean, many people can picture their mother screaming at them. We never remember what she said or what she was screaming, generally speaking. We see that terrifying distortion of her face. I think that's the worst part of it. And the sheer volume. And then you do the volume, you do some kind of metaphor for what oncoming, oncoming. What gets fired at a person like that? Is it like cement coming out of the chute? Is it like fire hose is a cliche because people say that, they use that a lot. So you know, you have to sidestep the cliche. Uh, and, I mean, her venom gushed out like an uncapped fire hydrant. I mean, you could use that. But you have to be careful, the cliche. Gets us into the question that GB had, okay, which is how does one keep big emotion from becoming melodrama? Um, so this is the question of what is melodrama? Melodrama is unearned emotion. People don't go from serenity to explosion. They do not do that. They ratchet up, ratchet up, ratchet up. And we have to see the ratcheting to believe that the big emotion has been earned. We have to be really careful because um, people don't turn on a dime. They build and then they pop. Scenes, any kind of extreme emotion has to be prepared for. We have to earn emotion. If we have to earn everything. If I want to have a happy ending in a realistic book, not a romance or something. If I want to have a happy ending, my character has to really fight for that. They're going to have to really fight for it. And it's never going to be an unmixed blessing. There's always going to be a bittersweet quality because of what you lost getting there. And we have to have seen it. So you can have a happy ending, but you have to earn it. And you can have great joy, but it has to be nobody can just walk around overjoyed with everything, right? There has to be chiaroscuro, there has to be dark and light. And the brighter that light, you have to have balanced that. Uh, in terms of a climax of a book, to show the turmoil. So we're not talking about a single emotion, we're talking about roiling emotion. Um, we have to know that whatever it is has been building up in the character. It's like that big underground volcano, the undersea volcano that's building off the coast of the Pacific Northwest or whatever. We want to see that building. And then maybe there's a small explosion, and then things have turned around, settled down. Other aspects of life have come in and suppressed it for a while, and we see it building and building again. And then when it blows, um, we're we're it's not a surprise. It's earned that uh, it's about time. And then when there's a big confrontation scene, it can be its placement can be unexpected. Maybe its subject matter can be a bit unexpected, but we have felt the tension building. So it's all about preparation. Um, let's see. Anybody else? Yeah. So that's how you keep big emotion. I like big emotion myself, uh, but I'm always really careful to have earned it. So that, I mean, some people think any big emotion is unearned, is is melodramatic. They like to see the characters really sitting on it all the way through, which is fine, but it's certainly not what Gail's talking about. Yeah, how they build, and they don't build in a straight line, and they don't build like vertically. They it gets I and then it's like, oh God, I'm gonna no, I'm not. And then it's like watching cat. Hey, you ever watch a cat fight? I mean, not humans, but real cats. Meow meow. Um, they don't just go 16 rounds with Mike Tyson. They're not just punching away until they're both in shreds, or you know, cats fight like this, and then the other, and then they back off, and then it's over, and then it's, and then it's. So there is a lot of movement in those scenes where they uh, will there will be a lot of dimension to the emotion and to the way the emotion expresses itself. Maybe somebody makes a damn good point. I have a character who practically puts a chisel through her mother's head, and um, and then when she realizes, like, she almost really did it, her mother, she then there's another emotion that comes after it, where you realize, I'm a dangerous person. I am a dangerous person. And that's a truth she didn't realize about herself. So there's a big emotion for the attack, right? And then there's another emotion that is in a different direction, that is that drop that we're talking about, like dropping off of the 6-story ride at Magic Mountain or something, where you realize something really horrible about yourself in that moment. And then that's another movement. And then how are you going to leave that? Is that going to be like one of those where you've just yelled it all out, and then you're just, now this is the worst. I don't know how we're going forward after this. when you look around at the dead bodies and the rubble and you go, oh man, I did that. Yeah. Now what? Or what was the outcome of that big emotional climax? Where you go from there. So Leslie says, Sarah says, a possible approach, the protagonist isn't used to feeling the intensity of anger. They're experiencing the climax. So they really experience as something foreign and new when it happens. And does that feel good? And how would that express in the body? Does it feel light? Where do you sense it? Is it the Popeye moment? Da 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 da, and the muscles come out, and it's very jaw oriented, and so always think of where it's expressed in the body. How do you feel it? And the almost the only way to do that is to experiment on yourself by keeping a Rosetta Stone, watching a movie that drums up a lot of emotion, and then it's like, okay, stop. Where in the body am I feeling this? And then follow the emotion, write it down as it happens, and develop that vocabulary. So here's another question from GB. How does one use subtext in dialogue in building to big emotion? It doesn't have to be, it can be in a dialogue scene, but the dialogue is the actual words are the expression of the emotion rather than the cause of the emotion, right? So what you say comes out of what you're feeling. You don't say it first and then have the feeling, right? Um, so how does the subtext work? Well, subtext is when characters understand what's going on in things not said. So if subtext can be, um, are you wearing that dress? Well, the subtext is that dress is ugly, you have no taste, only I have taste. Um, it's a cutting down of somebody maybe in a joyful state of mind. You come down in your pretty dress, and somebody says, is that what you're wearing? So you react to the subtext, you know. They've said was, "Is that what you're wearing?" But if it's usual, I mean, the best drama is between people who know each other very well, and it's all subtext. They don't have to say much. They just say, "Is that what you're wearing?" And the way that hurts, that you can just feel, say, you feel the dress wilting, you feel it, becoming ugly as you stand in it, and the waves of it could be the waves of fury at that person, or it can be the waves of self-hatred, depending on how you set your character up psychologically, and then finding where in the body that feels like. How do you find metaphor for that? So it's reacting to the person, whether or not they've said it, doesn't matter. The subtext is the subtext, you know? Um, so Blair says, the older I get, the more a sudden switch in emotion feels realistic to me. It's interesting how somebody, you find them so attractive, and then suddenly you see them in a different light, and that all that swoony moony thing is like off like a light. And then sometimes people talk themselves out of it. Oh, don't be so judgmental, which is very interesting as people try to talk themselves out of their big emotions, out of their reactions. People are so weird. uh, um, how does one use subtext in dialogue in building to the big emotion? It depends on which character we're talking about here. Are we talking about the antagonist using subtext? Or are we talking about probably the antagonist using subtext and the protagonist reading the subtext? Would be a source of building big emotion. You know, somebody, are you wearing that? And it's like, ugh. And then that often the antagonist is a gaslighter. And so, well, I was only saying, why are you getting so upset? It's just, you know, it's just a dress. It's just, um, you know, it's not quite your color, or, I didn't mean anything by it, blah, blah, blah. And that's not at all what it is. And the reader does too. So the emotion that comes from, that kind of antagonist using subtext is very interesting. Um, the older I get, the more a sudden switch in emotion feels realistic. Cold feet. Um, when you're younger, you tend to talk yourself out of your emotions more, I think. Maybe not. Maybe not. It depends on your character and how you've set them up emotionally. Whether there's somebody who talks themselves down or somebody who gets angrier and angrier. Um, the switch from anger, in a scene, because what's a scene is one person putting pressure on another person. Like this. And so a switch can be, it's like a joke. It's just a joke, and at first it's a joke, and then you have the switch, and it's like, that stung, something landed, and then it's not funny anymore. Um, so that, especially when people are inebriated, like a bar fight, it could start out as playful, just a joke, and then somebody gets mad. It's all fun and games until somebody gets hurt. Uh, you struck a nerve with somebody, and suddenly, especially if inhibitions are low, um, uh, that can turn into a fight really quick. Um, the novel, say, GB says, the novel Crime and Punishment dealt with big emotion of the crime itself, and then seemed to continue with the protagonist's emotional journey, reflective and so forth. Yeah, yeah. There's a high key in Dostoevsky. There's a dread that uh, is set up and never completely relieved. So it could be set off at a moment's notice because it's always going. This guy has committed a crime, but even before that, he's somebody who's under a lot of pressure in various directions, and there are things that distract him from it, and then there are things that bring him back to it, and then there are things that ratchet him up within that dread. And that continues throughout the book. That's a Dostoevsky kind of background music, or not even background. That's the music that uh, those novels in general have, that music, and they can be ratcheted up. And sometimes there's humor that ratchets it up, you know. Yeah, God, the father in the Brothers Karamazov is so awful. He's so awful and funny and awful. And he's ratcheting up all all of his sons, except the angelic one, of course. But he's cranking them up. And those are great antagonists, man, the ones that spread it around, crank everybody up. Um, Satire cutting emotion can destroy personal relationships. Yeah, even though the initial statement may have been innocent, in families, always cutting somebody down, always cutting somebody down. And it's just the way we do. until maybe they have an experience that they decide to back up and go, no, I just hate you guys, and that's the truth. Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Um, I think that when you're building a big emotion, uh, sometimes undercutting it, be careful not to undercut it. If you're really building and you're having trouble building that emotion in your characters, you don't want them to let themselves off the hook too easily. Sometimes we're uncomfortable with those big emotions. And so we try to, oh, I understand why she does this, that she didn't get a date. She doesn't want me to have the date so we can stay home and watch TV. And, if this is why characters who have had too much therapy are not really good fictional characters. The things we learn to do in therapy and kind of understand why people do what they do, um, undercuts the rawness. Let me tell you, nobody in Dostoevsky had therapy. If they did, that it just wouldn't be a book worth reading. Because the process of the events of the book are what teaches the lesson. Whereas if they are just, if they work it out in an office, it tends not to allow the full drama. If people in there, if characters in Shakespeare had been in therapy, it just wouldn't, which is fine for real life. We don't want to kill ourselves and have, the stage awash in blood. Uh, but it makes for good drama, uh, for sure. So you want your character to be learning self awareness. You don't want them to be so together that they themselves undercut the drama. So that's why characters are different than real people. Everybody knows characters, in your life. And generally, they're interesting, but not necessarily somebody that you want to live with or marry or have children with. It's like little, when I was younger, I wanted to be a character in a novel. I wanted to be so romantic and mournful and, sarcastic and difficult, mysterious. And let me tell you, who would want to live with that? Okay, well, I think we've gone through this question pretty good. So Amy has a last question here. If we have time, I'm about to send my novel manuscript to some beta readers, hoping you can offer tips of how to make the most of their time. Okay, have them write where they stopped reading for any reason. If they put it down to get a sandwich, if they put it down for the night, just stopped here for a sandwich, or stopped here for the night, stopped here, picked up 3 days later. You start to know where the slow places are. Have them absolutely tell you the absolute truth of how they feel about it. Um, have them give you a check where it was great. It's like, oh yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Underline. And then circle anything they stumbled over. That's another thing that's really important. Note any cliches, circle with a C over it. Anything they wanted to see more of, I use a little suitcase in the corner, in the margin, unpack, or a little door, open the door. I'd like to understand more of this. So these are good things. Anyway, I'd like to uh, thank you for coming, and we will see you next week for Writing Wednesday. Thanks.